I sat there one time and wrote a term paper on the history of like the Christian church or something for a history class in a recliner with a laptop, just smoking 3-foot bong loads while watching the whole Star Wars, like
Wow.
either weed was taboo. For me, it was like this: weed was taboo. Eventually I tried weed and I realized they were lying to me
All the
about a
taboos
lot of
bullshit.
shit.
Yeah.
And then because I understood that they were lying about that, especially growing up on the just say no and all this shit and religious and it's the devil's this and that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you finally have some when it's okay to drink. So you finally smoke weed and you're like, didn't get a hangover. I actually got better sleep. I feel more relaxed. They lied to me. And so what do you do? Like most people, we just decide to go head over heels into the whole
If
thing.
one is good, 10 is better.
And so you're like, F this, I'm going to start smoking weed. And so for me, like from age, 0 to 19, I was dissuaded from smoking weed because in the Christian church, they're like, oh, you're going to deal with the occult and the devil and this and that. Like you can get drunk off your ass, you know what I mean, to be throwing up before church. And that's somehow somewhat okay. It's still not okay, but John just had a rough night, but God forbid you smoke a joint and relax. It was an awful thing.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I had all this like fear about weed. And in high school, I was on like a band trip and I saw a kid smoke a bunch of weed and cough so hard he threw up. So that made me think that weed makes you throw up. So I was like, oh no, I don't want to do something that makes me throw up. So even in high school, I was a little, I don't know. So then fast forward to, I have a degree in jazz guitar performance of all.
Which is a hidden talent of
useless
his, by the
things.
way.
Yeah, I don't play as much anymore. But back then I was playing a lot. And so I was with a band with some people. And at the Monterey Jazz Festival, I was playing at the Monterey Jazz Festival in a student band. And 19, this kid comes up and he's like, "Oh, I got this weed," and I don't know what it was, but I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna try it tonight. I felt like a safe environment. I was like, oh shit, I hope I don't get ill. I hope I don't. Who knows what will happen?
You don't
It was
know
like
what's
this
gonna
big
happen.
adventure.
Yeah,
I'm in a hotel right across from the fairgrounds where the Monterey Jazz Festival is. That whole vibe. So then I took a puff, and all I remember to this day is I had the best fucking time. I had so much fun. I woke up the next morning feeling like a champ. And when I woke up, I was like, thought I would have a hangover. This is how naive I was about it. Like, I had no idea. There wasn't near the research or, the internet as much to say what's going on. And
You couldn't just talk to other people about it either because
it's in the 90s,
well, even I would say even in the recent years, there weren't enough places where you could go and conversate about weed. It's either people are just heavy stoners and all they'd want to do is advocate for it, or they're completely against it. There was really no middle ground of like talking about it like we're trying to discuss it today.
There was no open dialogue.
There's no open dialogue.
Because of this, and because I woke up without a hangover, I immediately the next day said, I am now a stoner. Like I declared myself.
Dude, for real.
Let's go get that shit. We got in the car. We drove to someone's dealer in Monterey and we bought as much as we could get. And pretty much from that point into my 20s, I smoked every fucking day. Like, I mean, in college, I was wake and bake. And for me, I did it because I was like, well, obviously it's not affecting me. I passed all my classes. I sat there one time and wrote a term paper on the history of like the Christian church or something for a history class in a recliner with a laptop, just smoking 3-foot bong loads while watching the whole Star Wars,
wow.
At that time, 3, 4, or 4, 5, and 6 or whatever, so I'm watching Star and then turning it in, like crunching it the night and getting a B, you know what I mean? Or getting an A and being like, yeah, weed doesn't affect me.
Weed is great.
Yeah. I didn't really feel like I would see people that you would call stoners or losers who were tired, but here I was like passing my classes, getting up and doing all this like functional stuff, So I thought, what's the harm in it?
Yeah, that's so funny. The parallel is exactly like my story because when I was getting into weed, I was already making $115,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I was like 25.
Yeah, I'm successful.
I was like, every fucking person looking at me is like wishing they were making this kind of money.
Yeah.
And I was by myself. So I was further away from family, didn't have a lot of friends. I wish I had more friends around.
Yeah.
So part of it was like I was by myself, and that was one way I found to enjoy was getting high. But then I was still like working pretty hard and found a good way to escape from like the stress that I felt. And I also realized like, okay, if this isn't really doing any harm, then I think I'm just going to continue this habit. And I remember, we're both kind of like this. We're like, we tell everybody if something we find is great.
Oh, yeah.
I was convincing everyone that I knew about how great weed is and how they should all get high with me and we should do this together. And, I had a whole array
create a
of
community.
Yeah, I wanted to create
It
a
does.
whole
It
vibe
does,
with me. I
yeah,
bought like
yeah.
the volcano. I bought
know,
like
you had
all
it
the
all.
fucking products you can imagine. You
You
know,
had the money to buy the good shit.
I had the money to
too.
buy the good shit, so I'm buying
No
with the
dish
German
weed here.
vaporizers, and like you're buying like ounces or half
Top
pounds or
shelf
whatever
shit,
shit at
yeah.
a time, because you're like, oh man, that's some good purple, man. How much can I get a half of that or
Yeah,
what? Like
yeah.
how much is this? So always having just a lot on hand. But it was funny because at that time I would have never been convinced out of my mind like I should ever even consider taking a break or stopping weed, because I just couldn't see the downsides of it.
Yeah, what's the downside?
Right.
I mean, weed doesn't, at face value, and to me, that's what makes it. That's what makes it so deadly. But it's not deadly in that sense. But to me, that's really the hidden thing in it, and we'll
Yeah.
get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Is there doesn't appear to be a downside, because you're like, how am I not?
Functioning.
Other than like maybe I want to munch too much, and
Yeah.
some people don't munch, but other people they want to order that late night
Totally.
pizza or something, but some don't. So you're like, okay, I'm not really seeing. And with the whole war on drugs and everything too, it's just making you. And if you're more counterculture, like we
Yeah.
might be, or not just believing the whatever narrative that comes out, you're like, dude, we've been lied to. This stuff is awesome. People use it for cancer. They use it for this. They use it for that. So why can't I just use it? You know? So, so I ended up smoking, like I'm talking like wake and bake, dude, all
Yeah.
through college.
Yeah.
All in, because I was involved in music.
I
Everyone
mean, it's the
got
same thing.
high.
I was waking up before brushing my teeth. Next to the sink, I had a dab rig, and I'm taking a dab before brushing my teeth.
You went
It's
even
fucked
deeper.
up, bro.
I would, dab,
Literally taking a dab.
wake and dab,
Wake and dab. And then sad, Mimi used to come up and visit me every once in a
Yeah.
while, like once a month for the
She's
weekend.
like, I can't believe she
Dude,
saw that.
I
wasn't
know,
like, Who
dude.
is this
I'm
loser?
surprised she's still with me. It's a shocker. I would have a volcano next on the right side of my bed.
uh-huh.
There'd be times when I'd be waking up in the middle of the night, blowing up a bag, and
Oh
just
my
smoking weed,
God.
and then going back to bed,
Yeah.
and like waking. Like I had a volcano always
Just
hot,
constant.
like because those devices are desktop, so this always on temperature, ready to take a hit. So I was like, I thought it was a little crazy what I was doing, but at the same time, like we were talking, like you don't see what is the downside of this, and you're like, why would I want to stop?
Well,
And
yeah. Let me tell you a little downside that happened to me now that you are. It's actually triggering my memory now.
That's good. I'm glad.
Because I'm like, now that you mention it, in college, at the end of college, I had a downturn. And I'm not the kind of person to get depressed. And it's one few times, maybe 3 times in my life, I can say I've actually been depressed. And I got into a depression. And I had graduated college, and I was playing music, and it wasn't as fulfilling.
Yeah.
And I was getting high all the time. And I just remember I just started getting depressed, man. And I didn't know what it was or why I was or what to do. Like I just hit this real crisis in life, you know? And I remember at that time when music wasn't working out, you know, I mean, it was working out, but not paying enough, you know, like I wasn't like at your age making that kind of money. I was making peanuts. So I was like, okay, I'm going to move. This was back on the East Coast, New Jersey, New York area. I moved back to California. And that's when I kind of like got like resaved again. I started going to church, like kind of the origin of where I was at before. And I was like, maybe it's the lifestyle I'm leading, you know? So I was like, went almost back to like weed is bad. Not necessarily that it's bad. Like I never went back to how I thought about it before, but I just had to change my lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking after smoking every single day, once you make it out of the first 2 weeks to 4 weeks, it's kind of like being sober was a new high. Like, oh my
yeah.
God, like everything seems amazing. Like,
well, you've just
wow,
spent so much
yeah.
time cloudy, and you finally
Yeah,
start
that
to
becomes
see
your new
clear
norm.
again.
Yeah.
It's like your short-term memory is all you have available to you, and if in the last like 4 weeks you've only gotten high, you don't know what the fuck is behind that. You've never, you
Yeah.
forget. So it's all you
Yeah.
know. And I think what you're saying, it was interesting because the first time I thought I had an issue with weed was I was calling my mom, you know, and she's in the medical field, and I was like, Mom, I don't understand. I'm waking up, I'm really nauseous. And I told my parents that I was smoking weed.
Yeah,
They
okay.
they didn't know so much about weed, but they were like, okay, like
Yeah.
they understood how stressed out I was, and they were like, okay, if it's helping you, that's fine. Just don't like go overboard. Obviously,
Yeah.
they don't know I'm taking dabs before I fucking brush my teeth. That's a different story. But I was telling her, and she was like, you know, there's been a bunch of cases coming into the hospital of teenagers and young adults who come in because they have nausea and they're vomiting, and they do all the full panel tests on them,
Yeah.
and they don't
Oh,
find
that was a
anything
thing,
is wrong.
weed, yeah.
And then they'll say, well, what is the issue? And a lot of them, those kids are not telling the doctor that they're smoking weed also.
Yeah.
And it turned out it's CHS, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which
Yeah.
is a toxicity that develops in your system from too much weed.
Yeah, you're just building it up.
And I was like, oh fuck, maybe I got to slow down. Like that was my first indication of like
Yeah, just something.
hitting some effect where you're just like, okay, I think I need to slow this
Yeah.
down. And then you started to, because I moved from starting with solvents and like the dabs to first realizing that's way too expensive, right?
Yeah.
To go into like, okay, what's the alternative? Okay, flour, and then you're rolling joints and blunts. You're like, that's too much weed being used to get high. To then finally go into the drier vaporizer stuff, like with the Volcano and the Mighty, because it's a small amount, and it's basically like taking the plant in its raw form and vaporizing. And that was like the conclusion of like, hey, this is the best way to do this if I'm going to continue this habit.
Yeah.
And I think almost like 3 years into, or let's say 2.5 years into doing like weed every single day, I was getting to a point where I wasn't working out like I was before. I was just every time after work or whatever, I just want to get high and like enjoy myself.
Yeah.
And so my habits started to shift. So it's more smoking habits, less active habits.
Yeah, but let me just interrupt you one second
Yeah.
because I want whoever's ever going to watch this to realize we're talking about this years like it was, we're talking about it quickly.
Yeah, we're talking about it
But
fast.
when we're talking about a habit shift, that's the sneaky shit about weed is the shifts come like very slowly. You know what I'm saying? If you want to go take fentanyl, it's like, you know what I mean? If you even get up again, you know what I'm saying? Or some kind of heavy ass
it takes
drug.
years to notice anything.
Yeah, that's what makes it so fucking sneaky. Is you get in there and you start smoking, and you feel great, and it's like a long-term loft. Like, and I know people who have gone 40 years long-term,
Totally,
loft, and they don't even realize how low they've gone in terms of like, maybe you still go to the gym, but you don't lift as hard, or it's just a very slow thing.
Your
where it's
complacency level goes higher, and you don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, so I just want people to know when
Yeah.
we're talking about these shifts, these are not quick shifts like you just wake up one day. I mean, you woke up one day nauseous, but it's not a quick shift in the sense of your daily lifestyle habit, and even more so your energetic level and your ability to just be perceptive and aware what's going on inside yourself and others. That's all being muted, you know?
Totally.
Like you're getting, your perception is being muted. I don't want to say dumbed down because sometimes you actually have better auditory
enhance it.
perception.